In the previous video, we left off at this diagram. We know that these 4 kingdoms are part of the 7 kingdoms identified with the 7 heads of the beast in Revelation, but we still don't know where to place them. In this video, we're going to correctly place these 4 kingdoms, which is no small matter, and we're also going to identify 2 more kingdoms. Let's begin. Many theologians place Babylon as the first kingdom. That is, they consider the 4 kingdoms we've identified as the first 4 kingdoms in this series of 7, even among well-versed theologians. Since we're here, I'm going to explain once and for all what I mean when I talk about the well-versed theologians I mention so often. To understand Revelation, we need several keys that allow us to open this marvelous chest that reveals and shows us the future, what is going to happen in the world. Symbolism is, of course, an important key, and understanding symbolism correctly is essential for us to understand Revelation, but it's not the only key. There are other very important keys. For example, understanding the sanctuary. Revelation talks a lot about the sanctuary, much more than you might think. If you don't understand and don't grasp how the sanctuary works, you'll never understand Revelation. That's just how it is, plain and simple. So, understanding the sanctuary is another key to being able to understand Revelation. Oh, let's talk about another key. One of the major themes in Revelation is judgment or judgments, because there are 2 major judgments, one before the millennium and another after the millennium. To understand judgment, it's necessary to correctly understand certain doctrines that are related to it, especially 2, the doctrine of the state of the dead and the doctrine of God's law. If we don't understand those doctrines, we won't be able to understand how the 2 judgments work, and therefore we won't be able to understand Revelation. So yes, understanding certain doctrines is another key to understanding Revelation, and both the sanctuary and the doctrines, along with all the keys, we'll be covering them here on this channel. Now then, I call well-informed theologians those theologians who have a thorough and accurate understanding of these different keys and comprehensive knowledge in their field, and are able to distinguish between fact and fiction in their scholarly work, but still have myths embedded in their teachings. In other words, there are indeed errors that have been established over the many, many years as if they were undeniable, indisputable truths, but they're actually very wrong in reality. In other words, they have myths deeply built in. And right now we're going to reveal, to explain to all of you the very first big myth. Babylon is not the first kingdom in the prophetic chain. We're going to present several arguments in favor of the sequence we believe is correct, but first I want to mention 3 major arguments for why Babylon can never be the first kingdom. Whenever Babylon is placed as the first kingdom in order to reach 7, it becomes necessary to count the little horn as a 5th kingdom, separate from the 4th. However, this does not align with the symbolism in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, it is explained that the 4th kingdom is a beast that represents Rome, and from that kingdom comes the little horn. For example, in Daniel 7 verse 7 it says that the 4th beast had 10 horns, and behold, another little horn came up among them. And in verse 23 it also clarifies this again, where it says, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on the earth, and the 10 horns mean that from that kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and after them another shall arise. In other words, it explains the little horn as part of the 4th kingdom. If the intention were to explain the symbolism of the little horn as a 5th kingdom, it wouldn't have been presented as a horn, that is, as a power within the 4th beast, but rather it would have been identified as a 5th beast. The same thing happens with Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2, if we place Babylon first, we would need to place the little horn as the 5th kingdom, which also doesn't match the symbolism of the statue and the metals, because the 4th kingdom, which is Rome, is represented by the legs of iron, and after the legs of iron come only the feet, which are mixed with iron, that is, part of the previous kingdom, and clay. And immediately after comes the rock that destroys the statue, which represents the kingdom of God. if we place Rome in fourth position, we still have 3 kingdoms left, and there aren't that many metals represented in the statue. The third major argument on this topic is precisely the one found in Revelation chapter 17, verses 9 and 10, which is the riddle we are trying to solve. It says, "This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings." But then it says something very important. 5 of them have fallen. One is referring to the fact that 5 have already passed and 1 exists in the present time of the author. And the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. When the Apostle John says 1 is, he is referring to Rome, which is the empire that was ruling at the time he wrote the book of Revelation. It clearly makes no sense from any point of view for the prophet to be clearly stating that 1 is, that 5 have fallen and 1 is, and be obviously referring chronologically to a kingdom that doesn't align with his own present. Now then, what are the arguments usually presented by those who claim that Babylon should be considered first? Basically, I've essentially discovered 2 main arguments. The first is that they say it would be strange for the prophetic sequence not to start with Babylon, since Daniel starts it with Babylon. However, in essence, Daniel starts it with Babylon simply because that was his present time. Daniel is seeing the prophecy from his own days up to the time of the end, when Christ comes. That's why it starts with Babylon and moves forward. And that's it. There's really not much more to explain on this topic. Another argument they present is the verse from Revelation chapter 13, verse 2, where it says that the beast I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like those of a bear, and its mouth like that of a lion. So they argue that John, when writing the book of Revelation, is also seeing the entire prophetic chain of events from his own time period, but looking backward through history. And so he mentions the various kingdoms in a specific order and ends with the lion, which is a symbolic representation. And that's why the prophetic sequence should logically end with Babylon, as it holds significant importance in the narrative. But regarding this, I want to tell you 2 things. First of all, John is not giving the full list. He's only mentioning 3 kingdoms. The leopard, the bear, and the lion. So, since it's not complete and only mentions 3 kingdoms, we don't know which part of the sequence he's completing and which part he's leaving out. Second, an important point is that the text is not intended to provide a complete and definitive list of the kingdoms. What John is doing here is essentially, in essence, explaining that the beast he's talking about has distinctive characteristics and attributes that are quite similar to those 3 kingdoms he mentions in the verse. That's the concept of the verse. Many theologians begin the sequence of 7 kingdoms starting with Egypt, placing Egypt and Assyria before Babylon. Now we're going to present a number of arguments in favor of this sequence. First of all, the first argument is that both Egypt and Assyria meet the requirement we mentioned at the beginning of this video, trying to destroy the entire people of God, thus having the necessary characteristic to be one of the 7 beasts in this sequence, as we have discussed. In this context, as previously stated, Egypt and Assyria are crucial examples. In the case of Egypt, Pharaoh Ramses indeed enslaved the people of Israel, and eventually God freed them through Moses. When they were trying to escape, Pharaoh pursued the entire people of Israel with his army with the goal of destroying them. Finally, God miraculously frees them by opening the Red Sea. The people of Israel are able to escape safely, and the entire Egyptian army is completely buried when God miraculously closes the sea back over them. And the same thing happens with Assyria. King Sennacherib forms a great army to destroy all the Jews, that is, the people of God, during the time of King Hezekiah. However, God delivers them by sending an angel to destroy the entire Assyrian army. And this story is found in 2 Kings, chapter 18, and 2 Chronicles, chapter 32. The second argument is that God also prophesied about Egypt and Assyria. In every case, God always prophesied that there would be these 7 attacks against the people of God, and also that he would deliver them. And just as he prophesied to the kingdoms from Babylon to Rome through the book of Daniel, he also actually indeed made the same prophecy that the people of God would undoubtedly be attacked by Egypt and Assyria, and that they would also certainly be delivered. In the case of Egypt, he did it with the prophecy of the 400 years given to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, and in the case of Assyria, the prophecy was made in the book of Isaiah chapter 14. Another important point is that these two kingdoms were also represented by beasts. Egypt, which is the symbol of idolatry, was represented by a heifer in the book of Jeremiah, and Assyria was represented by a wild donkey, not only in Jeremiah but also in the book of Hosea. Another reason to consider Egypt as part of these 7 kingdoms is that Egypt is closely linked with the book of Revelation. First of all, it is important to note that the plagues that God used to free his people in Egypt are closely related to the plagues that God will use at the end times, as we know, as described in the Bible in Revelation, and also indeed the way God rescued and delivered his people of Israel in a miraculous manner at the end when they crossed over through what seemed an impassable barrier, the Red Sea, also parallels quite closely with their final deliverance as described vividly in Revelation. I firmly believe that all these compelling arguments we've mentioned are more than enough for us to be absolutely certain beyond doubt that this sequence of 7 must begin with Egypt and not start off with Babylon. In any case, if you still have any doubts, as we move forward, you'll see how the symbols fit together so exactly and so precisely that in the end, you won't have any doubts left. As we have previously discussed, what identifies these kingdoms, what makes them unique, is that at some point in their respective histories, they chose to serve Satan in order to wipe out the entire people of God. This doesn't mean that from the moment the empire is born until it disappears, which often spans many decades or even centuries, the entire period the empire was a beast serving Satan. Rather, it becomes a beast at the precise moment when one of its kings, or some of its kings, decides to sign a decree or take military action to destroy the entire people of God. So now we can have a much clearer picture. Now we can see the entire sequence of the kings we're talking about. And this is exactly the reason why in Revelation the heads represent mountains, which means kingdoms or kings, and also in Daniel the beasts represent kingdoms or kings, making the meaning of the symbolism truly astonishing. This profound and intricate concept is deeply rooted in biblical prophecy and interpretation. The symbolism used in these texts is rich and layered, providing a complex tapestry of meaning. I can assure you that both the Apostle John and Daniel, who were separated by 7 centuries, could not possibly have coordinated these symbolic details. This had to have been conceived and revealed by a higher being. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel Prophetia, where you'll find all the information you need about biblical prophecy.